Hi, this is the COD QA meeting, which is happening on March 29th. So today topics for discussion are anyone else also can bring up, but we have one item regarding how testing will work with Kubernetes-based code. And we can also discuss about Jenkins-based migration as well. And if there are any other items regarding the changes in the master, we can also start discussing on those as well. Okay, so Zach, do you want to go first? What is the item that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, thanks, Suchitra. So I guess the big change is now that we're using Kubernetes to handle bringing up the containers that make up Cord in master and in our new Helm chart based deploy. I guess we're going to need to figure out how to test that. Previously, we'd have you'd have a Docker instance on the QA system that ran like the API sanity check, and you just bring it up with Docker Compose, run the API sanity check, and then close that down. Now that we're going to have Kubernetes in the mix, we need to figure out what we're going to use, how we're going to deploy a Kubernetes-based or deploy Kubernetes on that test system, and then how we're going to load those jobs in to start those tests, run the tests against them, then tear them down. So I guess part of it is we need to decide and make sure we get on the schedule those tests getting written that work in that way. And also we need to discuss what kind of Kubernetes we're going to deploy on QA systems, whether it's going to be Kubespray based installation, whether it's going to be Minikube or some other thing, and sort of what the parameters are we want and how we want that to work. So that's, I sort of wanted to open it up for discussion. I don't really have a benefit, or I don't have any preference as to how this works, but I would just like to make sure that when we do get it set up, that we are doing it in a way that people can continue to test and run a lot of the tests outside of the QA systems, which is something that I've been talking to Kailash about a bunch, especially for the API tests. Okay. So that's my general thoughts. Did anyone else have input on that?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you that we need to be on the same page. At least that's important. So I don't know. Indeed, I was thinking as well to use well, after talking to Suchitra, of course, some of the machines in QCT to run these new tests, at least to start to install a Kubernetes-based environment and deploy containers over it. In general, well, I would think, first of all, I wouldn't reinstall Kubernetes all the time, whatever Kubernetes is. I would just assume that the underlay Kubernetes works. So I would leave it installed there. This would save quite lots of time. I think we should distinguish depending on the type of test we want to run. Because, you know, the thing is, if the assumption is that we say to people, as I hope, you know, sure, we provide some helper scripts to install Kubernetes if you want in a form of Kubespray, but basically what we assume is that you have a Kubernetes ready underlay, whatever it is, and we give you just the Helm charts. You know, it doesn't really matter the Kubernetes installation and to verify that, right? That's my thought, at least. So now, depending on the type of tests that we have to run, we can use for sure either Minikube or Kubespray. Of course, the advantage of using Minikube is that we can run it on a single machine, which is not bad.
So I guess maybe we should talk about the two different kinds of tests. One is going to be like a full pod, full installation test like we're doing right now. And those things, obviously, we should probably just wipe the node and do our installation process and test also our Kubernetes installation for what we're using. But then I guess the other question is for the acceptance test that we run on patch sets run through Garrett.
Right.
That's the thing I don't think we have well defined at this point.
Yeah,
So
I think probably we should first focus on the XOS API sanity pipeline jobs first before even we move to the regular QA based, which we deployed on the pods and then run the other tests. That is what I feel, because that's the most important thing right now before even we get the patch sets to be merged.
okay, so what I personally propose for that is that I build a pre-configured Minikube image. So every time you bring up that image, Minikube is already there, and we just deploy containers on top of it, and we do the tests, and then the image comes back down. Now, the other thing which is kind of transversal to this is to decide if we really want to use instances on EC2 or a fixed target. In any case, I would have an operating system ready with Minikube already installed on it. In the case of EC2, the machine will be destroyed at the end of the job, so the cleanup work will be automatically done. In the case of a fixed instance, but we have to evaluate the costs and the benefits of it, every time before running the test, I would go on it and run the cleanup commands. Like I would simply run a bunch of Helm delete commands, and then I would just redeploy the containers on top, run the test, and go out and exit. What do you
So
think?
in this case, I'm sorry. So in this case, is there any kind of profile that we will be using to install on top of it, to install all these containers, to bring up all these containers on the Kubernetes?
So for now, and I can share the basic documents we have in place. So for now, what we do is that we install the XOS core containers. Don't imagine everything as before as a quite monolithic installation. It's all separate, right? You can deploy just the XOS containers. You can deploy an ONOS instance, and then on top of it, you can deploy the Arcord profile. What we call for now Arcord Lite, which is the one that does the VSG functions in hardware, right? That's what we have for now, as far as I know. From here, you can test different things. You can just test if the XOS containers get deployed fine, if XOS performs his basic functions even without Arcord, and you can arrive up to install Arcord and test the end-to-end functionalities, right? If you have, for example, just to test, let's say, the XOS core API, I think you don't need to install the Arcord profile on top. You can just install the XOS containers and run commands against them and expect certain results.
So you mean like individually install the containers instead of using
Well, no. So you have just one command which allows you to deploy a collection of containers, which makes what we call the XOS core. Zach and the others can elaborate more on what these are exactly. But if the goal is to really test the XOS core APIs, for example, you don't need to deploy the Arcord configurations on top, right? Before you kind of had to, because when you do the installation, you have to deploy a bunch of things. Well, at least this is how I was using them. Maybe it's not like that, but this way is really modular, right? It depends what you want to test.
Yeah, but then
can I get a understanding of what the API sanity test consists of? I'm guessing that they're different for different profiles right now.
Yeah, currently we are deploying like our code local as an example, and then we are running some bunch of XOS based tests and like XOS based tests. Which, but these are mostly whatever we have are mostly core APIs, but there are few API tests which are like subscriber, Volt tenants as well. We do also have those. But if we have to change the approach, then we need to see what kind of profile we are loading, because when we are uploading the patch sets, probably we might also need to test the other APIs as well, not just the core APIs. Maybe something related to RCOD or MCOD as an example, even those before the patch sets get merged. So we need to decide on what we need to exactly test on the XOS API sanity based job.
So,
So
but Suchitra, sorry, Gopi. Here is exactly the point. This is what I think. To keep things modular, right? So, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is the part where I'm a little bit slow to understand things, because I don't have lots of knowledge on how the synchronizer and stuff works, right? But in general, I would think that if you do a modification in a behavior in an API of the XOS core containers, well, code, right? You anyway expect that given certain inputs, you expect certain outputs, regardless who is the caller, right? So in this case, if someone does that type of modification, I would expect that you deploy the containers and you always expect a certain output. If there wasn't any modification in the hardcore side, in the caller, like in the client, right? Why would we need to test also the client?
So let me jump in and explain where I think the value in some of our functional testing is. So the API sanity check, it isn't serving simply as an API test. It's also, I think, implicitly testing the synchronizer framework, in that we have model policies in the synchronizer. For example, in the RCORD profile, you bring up a VSG, or you bring up an OLT, it'll automatically bring up a VSG. Absent a profile, we don't have any other tests of those policies, because those policies exist in the profile. So I think it comes down to, if we want modularity and to test the synchronizer framework without testing a profile, then we would need to inject some, for testing only mocked up containers and synchronizers and policies, which we technically don't have right now. Does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I see the value. I'm just trying to, on one side, for sure, we have to, keep a low complexity, and I don't want to completely suggest to completely change the way we test things today, right? So if we want to start to just migrate the test to a different environment and do the same of what we do today, that could be a good first step. Now, till before we were discussing the underlay. So to me, in theory, before we were deploying using Docker, now the underlay is Kubernetes, but essentially the APIs don't change. Maybe the endpoints, the ports that we use change somewhere, but the tests remain the same. So we can agree maybe that a good first step would be to move in this direction. Then another thing is to work on modularity, and depending on what you want to really test, now that we can deploy different components completely separate from one each other, maybe depending on the different area the code is modified, we can trigger different type and different levels of testing. That was my second point, but maybe I'm going too far now.
Yeah, if I can jump in here real quick, Andy, just to jump back to the API test on terms of what it covers, it is meant to just cover API coverage. So you had mentioned that we test the synchronizer framework and all that, just to the extent that, for example, if we deploy an RCORD profile, like RCORD local profile. The APIs of the VSG service and the core group subscriber service or RCORD service, the APIs of those are available and they work, meaning we can hit the API and we can, create objects in those services. But on the API sanity based jobs, we don't do functional testing because we deploy a local scenario of Exos, right? So there's no OpenStack, there's no Vagrant, there's no VSG instances that will come up. So we don't test that in the API sanity tests that we have that are per check-in. Those tests occur on the physical pod and on our CAAB test, which are not per check-in test.
So let me clarify, just to make sure we understand the same thing. So there are tests in the functional testing now, the API sanity check, where you do, for example, create a subscriber and then you verify that in the data model, the OLT service instance and the VSG service instance were created after that subscriber was created.
Yes, in the data model, but we don't check the hardware in the API test because we're just deploying local profile. So yes, we do validate that the service instances are created object-wise, but on a local profile, all we're checking is the object is there, right? If object gets returned and it's been created. So yes.
Yeah, so my point was that does involve synchronizers, since synchronizers are where the model policies are executed that are saying, when you create an RCORD synchronizer or an RCORD service instance, go and create an OLT service instance in the data model. So that is making use of the profile and making use of the model policy engine in the synchronizers. So the functional tests are therefore they are implicitly testing that.
So, but you guys got my point, right? I mean, as a developer, I would expect that if I modify there's a test, okay, that verifies the functionalities of the XOS core itself. So if I submit a patch for whatever involves the XOS core, forgetting about the synchronizer and whatever, I expect that I give an input and I receive an output, and that should remain always the same if my functionality was developed correctly. Then, if I'm an hardcore developer and I modify a synchronizer or a profile, I don't know, I'm saying probably random words, but whatever concerns the hardcore layer, which is above XOS, in that case, I spawn up the XOS containers plus the hardcore related service containers, and I run my API to verify that everything works as expected. But as a source of truth, as a given thing, I expect that the XOS, when I test RCORD, I expect that XOS just works. And when I test XOS core, I just expect that the RCORD profiles work. This way, I test in a modular way different components.
Yeah, so I think the complication here is the synchronizer framework, which you can, even though it's not implemented as a library, you can kind of think of it like a library that exists in the XOS repository. And the only means we have of testing the synchronizer framework is, through deploying actual synchronizers, of functional testing it. We have unit tests, but functional test of the synchronizer framework, we have to have a synchronizer, and
I'm fine with it. I'm just suggesting to call what you call today the XOS sanity. For me, should become really the hardcore sanity, okay, API, and to don't necessarily test.
So no, if we look just one more item. So if we say RCORD sanity, yes, right now we do have some API sanity tests which we have for RCORD, but then probably the check-in jobs that we have right now, shouldn't it be like generic? It sometimes these could also be applied to other components also. Like you are testing XOS core, but then why should we be only specific to RCORD? Maybe later we should have like MCORD as well, right? So what about MCORD? So do you think that we should have separate jobs?
Well,
I talked with Kailash about this, and I thought that since we're auto generating some of these tests, can't those be can't that auto generation happen across different sets of services? So we could.
Yeah, it can, but what is the profile that we want to use there?
So it's based off, the profile will be set based off of what area of code you're changing. So if you're changing something in the module of or like in an RCode service, then use the RCode, deploy an RCode profile, and then run all the core container tests as well as the RCode specific API test, like VSG, RCode. Now, if a code was changed just in the XOS profile or something like the build profile, build repo, or the code or platform install repo, I don't think we need to go into the level of testing RCode, but rather just the core APIs of XOS. That's something we can do today. It's not in place. I've been testing it for a while, but we're still using our traditional RCode profile test right now. But that's certainly a direction we can move in, as soon as today. So we have the auto generation of test. So if that makes more sense, that's the direction we could move in. So based off of the check-in or which area of code has been changed, deploy the profile accordingly. If it's just an XOS change, like in the XOS base, then build an XOS profile, not an RCode profile, and just test the XOS APIs, the core APIs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is this the same one that we had talked about a long time back, but we didn't enable the job?
Yeah. So the job's enabled, but it's not listening to all the services and it's not deploying all the profiles, but it's something that can be done if that's the direction we want to move in.
Yeah, I think that's better because we listen to the changes and deploy these specific profile, and then we can auto-generate these API tests and then test them, because anyway we do have this XOS Gen tool, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be very cool. I mean, I think it would be a great step forward. Even looking at the time that the test takes, Kailash the other day told me that it takes like 20 minutes or so. Now it could be 15, could be 25, but still, if we can reduce it, that would be a great thing for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think most of the time taken is like building and deploying, but the tests usually runs very fast.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of the questions that I had. If we're going to be ripping up and down EC2 instances to run this, and there's also the transfer time of getting Docker containers and building Docker containers and various other things, if we want to try to push the API sanity test, the amount of time it takes down, I think we need to figure out either we keep a persistent node around and we have some caching of containers, or they just are hanging around on that node, or we need to figure out how to run like a Docker registry that those other nodes that we spin up use. That's why I think this is probably making this work efficiently sounds like it's going to be a kind of involved process.
So I would try to make it work and then make it work efficiently, but
okay, yeah.
But well, I mean, let's start.
I totally agree with that.
Let's start simple and then let's do nice things, right? But I agree with you. In general, we need to. I wouldn't call it like caching. I don't like the word because I'd like that every time we download at least freshly the containers, even on a fixed target machine. But yeah, if the containers are not on Docker Hub, somehow we have to push it to the cluster. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
If you're talking about testing this on AWS has its own Docker registry as a service.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is the network traffic is not going to go out into the internet. It will be in the same availability zone or region of AWS.
Well, we can also simply deploy Minikube with an insecure registry and make sure that it's always at the same IP address. And what we do is just push the new image to the Docker registry.
So I keep hearing about Minikube. Are there not any resource restrictions? I thought we needed some really large amount of memory and disk space just to do tests of some profiles. For instance, we test in our Ansible deployment for like 64 GB of memory availability. Is that like an artificial limit?
That's not for the sanity tests.
What's that?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's due to, the code in the box that we bring up lots of VMs. That's, as Zach says, that's not necessary for sanity tests.
So what is the minimum amount of memory necessary to be able to test an entire profile, let's say RCOD?
I would say, what Andy and I think we're using in Minikube is like 3 gigabytes. Okay. That's bringing up the VSG hardware or the RCOD Lite profile. Okay. But I had a question. I missed the first 5 minutes. Why are we going on EC2? It seems to me that our images, aside from XOS base, they build very quickly, and we deploy in Minikube very quickly from images that are built. Why do we need more resources than we have locally?
Okay, sorry. There are different discussions going on all together because we are just brainstorming in general. Could be somehow confusing. So the new Jenkins that we have has also an AWS EC2 module that is optional. No one says we have to use that, and we'll need to do for sure economical evaluations around it first, by the way. Okay, so but how people usually, like big companies, seems test things today is that they spawn a new instance. You can decide the type of instance on EC2, right? They execute their job and then they release the instance. This guarantees, of course, that every time you get a completely new environment, completely cleaned, if you have multiple jobs and you can have one executor per target machine, you can have multiple jobs not going in a queue, but going in parallel, right? And not waiting for other jobs. There are certain, nice things in this approach. The negative thing, of course, is that every time you run a test, you pay for an EC2 instance.
Also, is there not a requirement for connectivity to the fabric, especially if you're testing some of the profiles?
No, the fabric is another story. For now, we are talking just about API and data models. So we inject something from the top and we verify essentially that informations are stored correctly, as far as I understood. And that we can...
When you say data models, are you talking about the synchronizers? So XOS core and synchronizers?
Right. Yeah. Well, the first discussion was around these XOS API sanity, just because Kailash and Zach started from there, right? So I'm not talking precisely about the pod now. So for the pod, we can talk. It's another kind of another story. Here we're saying you submit a patch to Gerrit, okay, and you modify the XOS core code, and we want to verify that you didn't do anything bad, right? So Gerrit automatically triggers a build.
Okay.
So in that case, I suggest to abstract from these EC2 or not. We can, I really have to, again, do first of all economical evaluations around it and not just time-wise evaluations. But I would assume that there's a Minikube installed with a Docker registry, an insecure Docker registry. That's what you will find, okay? On top of that, you deploy the containers, pushing them to the Docker registry and instantiating them, and you run the tests, and that's it. And at the beginning of each job, you clean up, you make sure everything is clean before, so there are no other containers running.
So for the API sanity test, it means that we are only going to test the core and the synchronizers. That's it.
Well, this was the other discussion, right? The point was, depending on what you commit, we should probably test the different interfaces.
No, okay, so that's what's confusing me. the different things can be some changes to profiles. And if the profiles are bringing up the synchronizers and the services, then testing it someplace outside of our pod doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't make any sense. If you're saying we're going to test it on some cloud, it doesn't have to be AWS. We find some cheap economical way of doing it. Don't we still need connectivity to the fabric to do that? That's what I'm trying to understand. Where is the line we are drawing about this test? These tests are only software tests. They're not going, or even if there is some hardware, we just emulate that. Is that what we are saying?
So
Or,
yeah, so Gopi, maybe Luca, I can explain. So what we are trying to say is earlier also, whatever we have XOS API sanity, whatever we are talking are very lightweight tests. Like let's say the API is there, and then we can reach to it, we can get to it, we can post a simple post command, get command, retrieve. That's all we are doing. We are not checking the successor chain of what happens based on the operation that we are doing on a specific call. This is just to make sure that whatever changes that have been made to a specific repo, we are not breaking any other things, or we are not able to reach some APIs or post, or the models are still present and working fine. But the other test that you are talking about, every night we do build the pods, and then we are running the functional test, which you are expecting that the fabric is there, and we get to the hardware and we make sure that the instances are actually present, the containers are actually present. So all these tests will be run every day in the night based on the type of pod that we are using. So
right.
we are
So for
still,
what?
definitely we are testing others, but in the API, the sanity jobs that we are talking about, we do not need to go until that far, because we just want a quick way to verify this path set before even we
I
merge.
see. Okay, so the classification of tests for actually testing the pod is totally different. What are we calling those? They're not XOS sanity, obviously.
These
What are
are
those?
functional. Yeah, they are like full end-to-end functional.
Functional tests. Okay, so our discussion today is only about API sanity. That's it.
Yeah, currently, yes, we finish with the API sanity, and then we can also talk about the pod. But then with the new Kubernetes, we are not there yet, where we have a full test where we can reach on the pods and then complete the end-to-end service chain tests.
Okay,
So
so very lightweight tests that can be run anywhere because they're only XOS services and synchronizers and maybe some emulation. That's it, right?
you mean like on the sanity?
Yeah.
Yeah, sanity is very, yes, as I mentioned, it's very simple, just reaching the APIs, that's all.
Okay, in that case, it doesn't really matter where we run this test, I suppose. I actually agree with Scott here. This probably seems to be too lightweight to even think about an infrastructure where we spin a machine up and on AWS and try to do something there. It feels like we can dedicate, for instance, just 3 machines on an orange box to do it. If
Yeah.
you're talking about
But the point, Gopi, here is transversal to tests, right? The point here is that you assume the orange box is always up, right? So what's up if the orange box comes down? It's a maintenance time. It's my work time, which is not supposed to be my work, right? The orange box is supposed for development, right? If the VPN goes down, right? QA calls me and QCT in the evening, in the day, in the weekend, because the test cannot run, right? Because a VPN, a stupid router went down. Plus, you have an environment that potentially is always, could be dirty, right? And that's the other advantage of spinning up a machine on EC2. Now, I'm telling you all this just because these are the points that people brought up to me, and that's why people in the world do this, right?
But aren't we saying that we are not going to spin up new machines? We want to maintain some cache. We don't want to keep reinstalling Kubernetes. I thought that was what we decided in the beginning.
I'm just saying to don't focus now on this thing too much. Assume you have a machine, whatever is an EC2 machine or a target machine. I'll give you something, okay? At some point, we still have to do economical evaluations on this, and give other thoughts to this thing before having a final decision. Now, let's abstract from where the machine is, okay? And I'm just saying, start from the point where you have just Minikube installed, you download the containers, you run your tests, you close the machine, well, or you go out from the machine, right? Whatever the machine is.
Yeah, I think Luca's point is we just separate the what from the where, and I agree with that. Even though we can talk later about the where and the economics, and I do believe that we're moving to a more lightweight possibility than we had before. The first thing we need to do is figure out the what. What do we need to test?
I think it's a little more than the where. The strategies, at least, I think what people agreed on early was that we are not going to keep reinstalling Kubernetes or the infrastructure, right? That was the strategy. If that is the case, we will need some sort of an always available or almost always available mission at some point, because we don't want to keep reinstalling Kubernetes. We just want to clean it up and redeploy the services that are going to be tested.
Okay, no, that's even on EC2. Assume that the machine that comes up already has Minikube installed. You don't have to reinstall it.
Okay. So we're planning to, wherever we are going to do it, we are planning to use an image that already has the infrastructure on it.
Exactly. Imagine that whatever you do, start from the assumption that you already have Minikube there.
Okay. I'm a little nervous about using Minikube for this, but it feels like maybe we should start with that and then move from there. Minikube is not Minikube is not an operationally tested tool. It's being used as an experimental plaything kind of thing. CubeSpray, on the other hand, has been used in production and in development. It's been tested for more than 2 years, and there have been a lot of stability work around it. Yes, it takes a little bit more to install Kubernetes with it, but I prefer using that because it keeps up with the versions of Kubernetes and the associated technologies, and it's constantly being tested in production. At least that would be my choice rather than Minikube.
But the problem is having 3 servers, Gopi. So remember that in this case, you just have to test an API, right? It's just a matter of deploying few containers on top. Is like the most basic thing you can do, and just test one API and exit.
So you don't need 3 servers, you need 3 VMs, and deploy on that. You just need one machine, just like. So what I'm trying to say is I'm running CubeSpray on my laptop on a single machine. It just launches 3 VMs on my laptop, just like Minikube. Minikube launches 1 VM and that thing launches 3 VM. So you don't really need 3 servers.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we can start with Minikube. I'm just a little nervous that based on its history, I'm not very confident about its stability. They keep breaking and they take their time to fix it, and they don't always keep up with the latest version of Kubernetes. But yeah, if you are comfortable with starting with that, I'm fine. In any case, we'll have to start pinning infrastructure component versions. So Kubernetes, I think, will start pinning that, and Docker. So yeah, maybe we can start with Minikube. I did do a little bit of research on any off-the-shelf test suites available for Kubernetes. There aren't. There are some suites, but they are very vendor specific, and I don't want to do any sort of vendor logging. I suppose we can talk about what the test suite architecture itself will be. So I think Kailash mentioned that the tests themselves are generated. Are they generated into a container, or are they just a bunch of scripts that are run from outside the cluster?
Just a bunch of scripts. It just generates a bunch of scripts. In terms of the API test, they generate just test scripts that we run. Currently, we're running them outside the container, yeah, and then hitting the Chameleon APIs.
Okay.
So I imagine running the scripts will be the same as long as we have a connection to, as long as we know what the where the core container Chameleon API is running, and the port name that might change. So port number.
Yeah, in fact, I think we can keep this test scripts as is.
Yeah, that's what.
Because if these tests are running from outside the cluster and all you need is access to a specific service, yeah, that can be accommodated with Kubernetes. I don't think the test scripts themselves will change. I was just hoping that the tests themselves will be self-contained and they themselves are going to be deployable so that it's clean, right? So when we bring the Minikube or kube spray down, everything goes away. We don't have to do any additional cleaning. But other than that, making the services available for test scripts that are running outside the cluster should not be a problem. I don't think you'll have to change any of the scripts.
Okay.
So one more point that I wanted to bring up is the current job that we have for the XOS API Sanity pipeline job. So shall we just keep the same job until 5.0 release and then create a new one starting from the master branches and then going forward?
You mean until 6.0 release?
Not until 6.0, until 5.0, the old one, whatever we have. Let's say if there are any patch sets that happen on 5.0 or 4.1, then we are still running the XOS API Sanity pipeline, the current job that we have.
Because we have 3 versions out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then now the master, and again after that it will be 6.0. So then since this is completely different and we have Kubernetes, so we can have a different job starting with the new changes that we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless, I would try to migrate, which is I think is what Kailash is doing. I would try to migrate the job to the new Jenkins, which I believe is the patching flight these days on Gerrit.
Yeah, the new Jenkins, yes, but I'm talking about the old patches, right?
Yeah. So I would keep that job, and then I would create a new job that is triggered on master. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to let everyone know. So everyone, I hope no one has any objections to that or any other.
So this would be a Jenkins job?
Yes.
A new Jenkins job, okay.
Yes. And since we have the new Jenkins server, so we are going to create it on the new Jenkins job. On the new Jenkins.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about, because I'm not that familiar, when we do create a patch set and when we do test locally, is there a way we can get this test auto-generated and test locally on our machine before we even push the patch set? Is that possible?
I think Kailash, maybe Kailash, you can update.
Yeah. So I just pushed up a test a makefile target for testing the APIs. But I'm still trying to map out an easy way to auto-generate these tests. Currently, I showed Zach how I'm doing it, but it's basically a series of commands that we have to execute inside the core container, because that's where, rather than installing Exos GenX library outside of it, since you're going to be testing against a deployed Exos profile, whatever profile it is, an Exos core container will be running. I'm just leveraging that container because it has all the libraries and tools installed to use Exos GenX. So I'm just running a series of commands inside the core container, and then that'll output the scripts, the test scripts, and then you execute those test scripts. So I need to think about an easy way to auto-generate those. For now, what I can do is send you those commands. Let's say after you have a deployed Exos profile, I can send you those commands and then and then you can leverage the make test target that Zach and I just created, which is just make Exos API test. So yeah, there is a way, and I'll guide you to that. I'll point you to that.
So okay, I want to be sent.
Was to make it so that we could have a virtual env that would have all those things installed to generate those targets. But I don't think we got that far. But that would probably be the right way to do it. That's what we're using for documentation generation and a few other things.
Mhm.
So I want to be sensitive to our timed targets, but it seems to me, and maybe this can be a long-term goal, if there is a way of generating these tests and containerizing them, we can make an extremely light. It doesn't even have to be a Helm chart. We can just make a very simple deployment for Kubernetes that we just deploy, and that auto runs as a job, a Kubernetes job to test this. That would be an extremely clean approach, because in that case we don't even have to worry about the infrastructure anymore. As long as, like Lucas says, as long as Kubernetes is available, I can just test. How far out are we? Is that too complex to do at this stage? Are there a lot of architectural changes we need?
I don't think so. I don't think we're too far out. It's just a matter of putting all of these tools and scripts that we have together into a container and then deploying it. And then, yeah, I don't think we're too far. It's just piecing all these things together.
I thought these tools were in XOS core, or am I wrong? I thought you said we need to run this in the XOS core container.
Yeah, but you're saying that it'd be nice to have a test container and then execute the test from the test container, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
What advantages would that be rather than executing them just outside of your containers and just
operations become really, really simple. You don't have to worry about, oh, where should I deploy this test? How do I run this test? Where the target
The problem
is,
then is exfiltrating the results and getting them back into Jenkins. So I don't know how that simplifies. Having these in a container simplifies that, Gopi. And that's
how do we
these tests.
How do we exfiltrate now? I'm supposing it has some sort of access point to Jenkins right now.
No, Jenkins just runs them as a script, and so they have output into the local file system. Whereas if you ran it inside a container, you'd then have to get them out of that container somehow, and so that I think that might be more complicated than any benefit it would give.
So the problem you seem to be saying, Zach, is how to get the output of a container itself. That in itself is not a problem. If there is a deeper issue that is lingering, yeah, maybe we can take it offline. Getting specific outputs from specific pods or specific containers has never been a problem.
It's not just the output, but also there's log files that we have that Jenkins needs to copy over to the Jenkins, master service, so we can report it and see it straight on the Jenkins job.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's log files, not just the output.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I should understand that more. I do feel that having operational uniformity between these different pieces, XOS core, synchronizers, profiles, and the tests, making it operationally simple, will basically realize Luca's dream of having a very flat, uniform structure of infrastructure, and just everything else becomes just the same or very, very similar set of commands for deployment. What happens on top of that is depending upon that application. In this case, the testing application. But having this uniformity of deployment pattern, I think that will really help us in the long run. It doesn't have to happen for 6.0. It would be nice if we could do it, but I think we should look for simplification of this operations layer, the infrastructure layer, as much as possible.
So maybe, Gopi, we can start with this whatever job that we are doing right now, and then with the new Kubernetes, since even we haven't worked much, probably when we are working on that in the next 6.0 release or in the master branches, then we might have a better idea if it is doable or if it is too much overhead for us.
Okay, makes sense.
Probably you will also get an idea when you are like running through these patch sets, and then probably you can also suggest few things at that time.
Sure.
So are we done with this specific item? I'm just doing a quick time check. It's almost 10:51 now.
I have a question. Is there a document that I can follow that'll? I've already installed Kubernetes deployment on KubeSpray, but is there a document I can follow to if anyone's done it on Minikube? It sounds like that's the approach we're going to go to, at least for right now, in terms of the API-based jobs, Sanity testing?
I've installed Minikube on Cloud Lab, if that would be of any use to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. If you could just point me to if there's a document or if there's some commands, I can figure it out. If just send those my way and I'll start looking at that.
Yeah, and I shared just now with you and Suchitra the document I'm putting together for the Cube Spray installation. That in the lower part of the document, you'll see also how to do very basic things like deploy some containers using Helm or using CTL.
Yeah.
So could be useful as well, because it tells you also the ports that we expose on the from the containers and so on.
Okay. Thanks, Luca. And also followed by the same question regarding documentation. Luca, is there any document where we have installation procedures for master branch using the new Kubernetes?
Yeah, this is the document. Well, this is the only one I'm aware of, at least.
Okay. Oh, it has about the parts too.
Yeah, it starts from the installation script of for Cube Spray, and then how to do basic stuff on top of it, which I think is the part that really interests you in this moment, probably. Yep.
And also another question is, like, let's say if we have if we use the new procedure and then install the pod, is it easy enough? Like, what I'm asking is, let's say if I clean it up and then try to install 5.0, is it seamless process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't know. I wouldn't stress too much, at least for now, on the underlay part. Of course, you need to get something installed. But I really like the point where our boundary for now with the user is to say, our requirement is to say, have whatever Kubernetes you want installed, right? And we are just responsible for the container part, what goes on top of Kubernetes. So all what I'm saying is that I wouldn't start to test the Kubernetes installation. Of course, from the moment I provide a script to users, at some point we'll need to test that script. But for now, I really like to imagine the script we put together as really an helper tool or a demo tool to deploy very quickly a Kubernetes environment using KubeSpray. But I don't like to see it as the mandatory way to install all the stack, right? For example, when I go to Google, I'll just say, please give me 3 machines with whatever Kubernetes you like on top.
Okay.
So
we'll check the procedure, and when we try it out, we'll ask you for questions.
So it's very simple. You have Ubuntu. The only requirement is to have a management that the 3 nodes can talk one each other, and then on top of that, you install Kubernetes. Kubernetes comes in a sort of different distribution. The one we chose for many reasons after Gopi suggestions is KubeSpray for our pods. Now, it's not said that Google, Telecom Italia, AT&T want to use the same version, or at least I wouldn't care too much. The installation lasts like 10 minutes of the underlay. After that, you should have an homogeneous environment that abstracts from the machine below. That gives you this nice abstraction where you can deploy your containers with standard commands. What I would do would be try to just deploy on whatever Kubernetes we have these containers and test that the containers themselves work properly. That's really the part we develop, right? That's really the core of what we do. The content of those containers, like, for example, the XOS core, ONOS, or the profiles.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Luca. So we just have 4 more minutes. I think all other topics we can discuss in the next QA call. In this few minutes, I just wanted to introduce Ajitava from Polaris. They are an extension of QA team. They will be working on MCOD. Ajitava, can you hear us? I just wanted to introduce Ajitava with the core development that are on the call. So do you want to just give a brief introduction of your team and what you will be doing?
Sure, Chitra. Yeah. So yeah, I see like it's almost time, so I'll like quickly introduce myself. So like as Suchitra mentioned, like yeah, I'm a part of Polaris Networks, and mainly I'm working on MCOD. So I'm closely working with Suchitra and her team, and I think like a month or back, I think we had a session where we gave a demo to Suchitra, right? A month
Yes.
or so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So currently, like we gave a demo where we tested like the SPGWC and basically with our own test suite and show like how we are doing an UA attach and detach and uh, basically trying to send data from E node B. So like it was a basic testing setup which we did on COD 4.1 using the MCOD profile, and we did a demo. So the basically like the future plan is to run more tests using various test suite what we have and test the LT components. So we did try with MCOT 5.0. I know, like Suchitra mentioned in a mail, like I think there was a discussion with Andy where he's mentioned like not to go forward with MCOT 5.0. But still, we are trying. We have not yet tried. But the setup what we had, we still have in our lab is 4.1. And I think we are having a discussion with Suchitra, where Suchitra and Luca, where we are getting a setup on ONF, I guess, probably, where we'll be installing MCOD and we'll be running our test. So that is a brief introduction from our side. So yeah, I'll be closely working with Suchitra and team for MCOD. Thanks.
Thanks, Ajitava. Yeah, that helps a lot because MCOD we do not have resources to test MCOD. So you being on the team, that's a great help to QA. And since you are handling complete QA for MCOD now going forward, thanks a lot.
Sure.
All right, we have one more minute. Anything else quickly that we have to talk? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Cheers, guys.
All right.